Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. As we face another hot, dry period, we felt it important to bring back a show from 2020 on managing pastures and livestock in drought conditions. If you have any questions about managing your pastures, please reach out to your local extension office. Also, make sure that you're recording any extra hay you're using and extra expenses your farm is incurring as a result of this drier period. And let's all hope for rain.
It is hot, it's dry.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I've had a couple people report to me that they've had a much smaller harvest in their second cutting, and that is going to affect us over the winter months. However, one of the things we wanted to talk about today was the importance of not overgrazing right now. While your grass is stunted and drought-stricken, it is the worst time to turn your animals out because all they're going to do is overgraze and damage the crowns of your grasses, and eventually they will degrade them to a point that they aren't going to come back very well. So the best thing to do right now is to feed that hay. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive because it's summertime, but when it gets dry like this, you really want to lock the animals into a sacrifice paddock and feed them hay right now. They're not going to do a whole lot of damage to the ground there because it's not soft and mucky, so you don't have to worry about that, but they are going to, just by walking on those dry crowns, they are going to do some serious damage for that. So you don't want to open all the gates and just let them go to find what food they can. That is probably the worst thing you can do for your fields right now.
Yeah, so let's back up a little bit and get into what kind of drought conditions we're in. It's nothing really to be terrified of, but it's something to be aware of. In Eastern Ohio, we're abnormally dry for the most part with pockets of moderate droughts. So if we're looking at the first category, which is abnormally dry, which is D0, the stuff that you're going to be looking for is growth is stunted, stock pond levels decline. So what we're seeing out there is a lot of really good springs are slowing down, sometimes even drying up, and the farmers are having utilized maybe different paddocks that have better springs to get water. We're also seeing like a decline in terms of growth. If we get into the next category specifically, you'll have low hay yields. So hay is going to get more expensive. You're going to find the leaves of the corn curling. And they do that to retain moisture and to kind of mitigate that light from causing too much damage in a leaf with no water. And the recommendations are to feed hay early, and also you're going to see impacts in fruit yields as well. So we saw early on in the growing season of 2020, we saw a delay going into the season. So we had that really hard frost in May. That really just delayed that first cutting. And, people got quality stuff actually because the grass didn't bolt. So people got low yields, good quality first cutting. People got excited and thought, hey, I'm going to have a really good second and third cutting possibly this year. The problem is we went from wet, cold to dry, hot. And the grass started stalling out. There's not much growth. Sometimes, periodically we'll get some spurts after rain, but there's really not enough to have continuous good quality growth. And the second cutting for most people right now is low as well. So, what we thought was a high quantity second cutting, we just aren't seeing because with those D1 conditions, that grass is really stalled out. And with grass stalling, you also have, unfortunately, the potential for warm season annuals to kind of take over a field. So one of the things Karen was saying is, as far as recommendations for grazing go, if you overgraze a field in a condition like this, where the cold season grasses are stalled out and not growing, what you're doing is opening up pockets in that field, and you're going to get a lot of warm season annual seeds germinating. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about crabgrass, I'm talking about foxtail that's coming up, and you're also going to get just a lot of pigweeds and stuff like that. Because that stuff does well in drought, hot conditions. And unfortunately, that could be a lot of junk grass for a lot of people. By overgrazing a field, you could really be setting yourself up for a weed disaster.
Yeah, and we have a lot of the same conditions here. We are also in the abnormally dry or the drought 1 level, which is not enough to trigger government assistance, but it always could be worse, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. Like I remember a few years ago, Karen, you and I were complaining about it being too wet,
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh,
and
yeah,
you,
I
and you,
do.
I distinctly remember, we were saying something like, "Yes, being too wet is really bad, but being in a drought condition is much worse." Wet's not that great, and it's hard to get out there, but at least you can manage livestock. You might have, a few sacrifice paddocks. You might have a little bit of a mess to go through, but at least you have something to work with.
But one of the things we wanted to talk about today was what do you do now, right? So we have this situation where we have lower speed of growing for our fields. And we also have loss of some water opportunities. So wean your calves a little bit early, feed them grain, good pasture or hay, and then sell them whenever they're ready. That'll give you fewer heads to feed. You might be selling a smaller calf as opposed to waiting to that 5 to 600 pound. There are people that are taking that strategy, but also selling older, lower quality cows before the prices drop too much from everyone trying to dump what they don't think they can support. So you need to go through how many cattle you have and how much hay you have and how much pasture you have. Conducting a hay inventory and a pasture inventory right now is really critical to know if you can overwinter the animals that you have with the hay that you were able to harvest, or if you will need to cull the herd a little bit. And so ask yourself these questions. How much hay and pasture are on hand, and what is the quality? That quality is going to become more and more important as the season goes on. And you're not going to know the quality unless you get a forage test. And I know our conservation district does cost share for forage testing. This is not terribly expensive, but you should forage test by field. And maintaining that hay that you harvested, that you can easily designate this was cutting from field 1 on this date, this was cutting from field 2 on this date. Give yourself a code. I've seen one farmer who does the plastic wrap and he just spray paints on the plastic wrap. Anything you can do to make sure that you know what hay came from where, so that when you get your forage quality test back, you can actually use it to start determining what hay needs to be fed to what animals. You also want to calculate out what the expected date will be to start feeding hay this winter, and also what is your expected spring turnout date. So go through your records of past years, try to figure out how many days you're going to need to feed these animals over the winter. And also, how many days of stockpiled pasture do you have? That's going to be an important part of this as well. You also want to count the number of cows, calves, yearlings, and bulls. We've talked a lot about nutritional values for each of those different life stages because you need to know what kind of food you're going to need to feed to these animals. And then look into how short your supply is for hay, what you might need to be buying, or what you need to supplement them with. If you have a lot of hay, but it's just not really good quality, what kind of supplementation do you need? And then making sure with the hay test that you are matching it with whether or not you need more energy or protein, balancing that out with the fiber and other aspects of the feed, making sure that you're giving the proper balanced diet to your animal.
That's right. Yeah, you just said a mouthful right there, Karen. So Chris Zoller, he's the extension educator in Tuscarawas County, published a nice article in Beef Magazine, 4 tips for grazing dry pastures. He's kind of highlighting a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. Stick to the basics. Maintain good fertility, soil pH can help grazing plants survive drought conditions. So a healthy plant, adequate soil pH, all that stuff, it's going to keep that plant able to pull through. One of the things that you did talk about was overgrazing, Karen, and that's one of the things that he's talking about. So when we talk about overgrazing, you're going to have different types of grasses that can tolerate different degrees of grazing as far as the severity of the graze. So, a lot of times 2 inches, the best rule of thumb as a good resilient grass. Going below 2 inches, you're going to have issues with it. And we're talking about grasses that are typically used for grazing. So our tall fescues, orchard grasses, the stuff that we know does well with grazing and even close grazing at that. When you overgraze, you remove too much of the leaf cover and the plant has to suck up energy from the roots and push that energy out to the meristem to grow more leaves. Now, conditions like these, that has a major impact on your plant because what's happening now is the grass is already stalled out, right? So it's not producing new leaves. Then you have those roots that are just trying to find as much water as possible. So if you're going below that 2-inch mark, those grasses are going to eat up the little bit of root reserves that they have. And those plants have a high potential of possibly dying if they maintain conditions like this. So overgrazing is probably one of the worst things you can do during a drought. Just remember, when you rotationally graze, don't just go by memory, but go by what you see. Just because last year you were able to get to a field every couple of weeks, right now that's not going to be the case. So you're really going to have to rotationally graze, do not overgraze, and then when you run out of paddocks that you can put the livestock in, supplement with hay or grain. Sometimes if the hay prices get high enough, grain might be a very cost-effective way to feed your livestock. And make sure that you have good water too. We don't talk about water being as necessary as far as weight gain, but there have been some very impactful research where the only thing that was altered was the quality of the water. It was almost 1 pound of weight was changed from having clean, fresh water to warm, stagnant water that wasn't that high quality. So I would honestly say that water is going to be one of the most important things right now.
Oh yeah.
Do whatever it takes to give that livestock good fresh water, because that's going to make the difference between not gaining any weight and possibly losing weight in your animals.
Yeah, water is going to be your most important nutrient right now. And always is, but it's especially seen right now. I mean, it's just like you and I. If I'm given a glass of cold water and a glass of hot water, and it's 90 degrees outside, and I've been working and standing in the heat all day, I'm gonna want that glass of cold water much more than that glass of warm water. So try to do what you can to make sure those animals have at least clean water. If you can't get them to a place where you have cool or spring-fed water.
Yeah.
And also, if your springs are drying up, it's important to let the government know. I know this sounds weird, but letting the USDA know either by contacting me so that I can put it into my report, or if you're submitting your own reports to the NASS that collects all of our ag data, if they don't know that your springs are drying up, it's harder for them to put in for drought conditions. So you definitely want to make sure. So if you're in Ohio County, let me know and I will put that in on my report. Otherwise, contact your local county agent, or if you submit your own reports, to make sure that you put that in there. Another thing to consider as you're looking out on your field and you're feeding these animals is you want to make sure that you are getting your animals to a body condition of 5 or greater. That is what you're going to need to help get your cows to rebreed well so that you're not suffering next year for low breeding rates. And also, you want to get your calves weaned and use fall pasture once the rains start coming back. That way, they can get that body condition score up. And that's going to help them get through the winter. So a fat animal is going to be better able to make it through the cold weather than a scrawny animal. So make sure you're checking your body condition score. And if you're new to agriculture and you don't know how to do a body condition score, or you're just really out of practice, we have lots of guides that we can get to you, or you can find them online. But that's a really important measurement to be able to do from just looking at your herd.
Yeah, Karen, and you're leaving like all the tough news to me right now because I mean, to be honest with you, at this point, if we're starting to feed hay early, our paddocks aren't producing right now. We're feeding hay early. We don't have a lot of hay going into the winter. So, just to think about this stuff, and it's hard to have those calves gain weight in the wintertime. It's the hardest time for animals to gain, right?
Right.
If the animal's not gaining, then you're having issues and you're losing money. So take it one step further and not only assess body condition, but also determine if you have enough feed to make it through the winter. You might have to potentially offload some cattle to make sure that the ones that you have enough feed and are gaining. Because if you go into a bad situation with too many heads to feed and everybody's losing weight, now you're losing money all the way around.
Yeah, you cannot starve a profit out of cows. You just can't do it.
You're going to have to make a decision and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to maintain 35 cows. I might have to get rid of 7 of them, call 7 cows going into the winter so that at least I'll be able to maintain some weight gain going into winter. Or maybe you're selling, instead of retaining any heifers that you might want, go ahead and sell those before the winter time and leave that for another year when conditions are better. Just plan ahead, think things through. Don't set yourself up for a worse situation than you're currently in. A lot of times short-term mitigation is much easier than long-term damages.
That's the truth. It really is. Think about it as an ounce of prevention. You are preventing problems next year by managing better this year. And so one of the things we mentioned earlier was supplements, right? And so what kind of supplement should you give to your animals? And when you want to think about adding a supplemental feed, you have to remember, A, give it to them slowly and make the adjustments slowly. You don't just want to take them right off of forage and put them onto corn or anything like that. You really want to look towards your high fiber supplements, such as soybean hulls or wheat bran, or your high protein feeds, such as soybean meal and corn gluten. Those are going to be your best supplements for a low quality hay. And the value of those supplemental feeds is going to be based on the amount of total digestible nutrients and crude protein. So, just like your hay, those are the things you really want to focus on. Like I said, you want to feed up to a body condition score of 5. If you can get it any higher, of course, that's great because, a fat cow is half wintered. But keep in mind that when you're adding those amendments, you're going to need to keep an eye on balancing out the crude protein and the total digestible nutrients against the actual hay that you have. So that's why that test is so important, especially in a time where you have less of your hay, because you need to know what you're actually giving to your animals, because you don't want to just feed them Cheetos all winter. That's my reference for poor hay. It's just fiber and it's not digestible, and all they're eating is Cheetos. It's not really going to give them that opportunity to gain some good muscle and keep them healthy.
Well, Cheetos will give you some fat cows, Karen. But I know what you mean. I know what you're saying. So yeah,
But not healthy cows.
in fact, let's kind of look at some of the classifications we give to hay. What's low, what's medium, what's good hay. So if we're talking low quality hay, we're talking about crude protein less than 5%. And we're talking about total digestible nutrients typically less than 45%. You got to remember something else, that when hay quality is low, not only is it feeding them less and they're getting less nutrients, but they're going to eat less of it. So if you're feeding low quality hay, that animal, chances are, is eating just under 2% of their body weight. Sometimes as low as like 1.5% of their body weight. If you got medium quality hay where the crude protein's at 9% and your TDN's at 50%, chances are that animal's eating 2% of that much hay. And if they're eating that much, they're actually getting about 2.16 pounds of protein. But on that example with the low quality hay, if it's 5% crude protein and they're eating 1.75% of their body weight, and we're talking about a 1,200 pound cow, they're only getting 1 pound of crude protein. Now, if it's good quality, if you have good quality hay that you stash somewhere that you're feeding during the winter time, at times of low food availability, possibly now, if it's 12% or greater, that animal can intake possibly 2.25%, 2.5% of their body weight, and they can get as high as 3 pounds of crude protein. So when we're talking about that, it's important to remember that overwintering cattle that are early in gestation, they're going to require at least 1.5 pounds of crude protein. If you have an early spring calving herd and they're in their last third gestation period, they're going to need 2 pounds. So that low quality isn't really cutting it, and that medium quality is just barely making the cut. If you have fall calving and your animals are in lactation during the winter time, now we're talking about 2.5 pounds of crude protein that they're only going to get if they have good quality hay. So know what you have. We can help you calculate what you need. Make a good program. Don't put yourself in a bad situation. Those calves are money, and two things can happen. That cow can either lose the calf from not having adequate nutrition, or that lactating animal is going to dry up, and then that calf isn't going to gain any weight. And there goes your money. So really think things through, because it's possible to lose calves one way or another, whether you're making a decision to call your herd, part of your herd, I should say, or whether you're trying to do too much with what you have, and then it catches up to you. You don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to throw out there is for those of you who have warm season grasses in a paddock, this is what you do that for. And it's for those dry, hot times when your orchard grass and your fescue aren't as happy, when the heat is up and the moisture is low. So those warm season grasses are going to give you much more growth right now, much more valuable for forage, even with as dry as it has been. Another thing you want to consider is right now it is much too hot to fertilize. Any nitrogen you put out there is just going to volatilize and be gone. And we're not expected to get any rain for a while. But you want to make sure that you are definitely going to get rain if you put some fertilizer out there in your fields to help improve a stockpile field for this winter's feeding. So you do want to make sure that it's cooler, that you are going to get rain within at least 2 or 3 days after putting your fertilizer out there. The longer it is before it gets rain, the less you're going to get out of that fertilizer. And also making sure that the grasses that you're going to fertilize right now, really you have to be careful. You don't want to graze that again until it gets cooler out. If you fertilize, leave it there. Do not cut it for the rest of the year. And I even tell people right now with their lawns, it's not a good time to fertilize your lawn, and it's also not a good time to mow your lawn. So just leave your lawn alone and don't do anything. And so if you have a pasture that you're not going to plan on stockpiling, don't want to waste your time fertilizing pastures right now, but you may want to look into the expense of trying to add some overseed for this winter to try to get a better coverage next year to reduce what Dan was saying about the weed problems.
Yeah, especially chemical urea. Chemical urea right now, the cheapest source of nitrogen typically
Yeah.
is probably the worst thing you can put on. It'll all volatilize. Your plants are, if not dormant, really in a low gear, just putting along here, just trying to get through it. If you are able to stimulate growth right now and you don't have water, that plant's going to stress. Things are not going to be beneficial. You're not going to get your money's worth regardless. So hold off on fertilizing, hold off on grazing.
Yeah, at least until it gets cooler in September, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. But, when it's hot and dry and you don't have much to go with, don't ruin a field that's going to put it out of a season next year.
Yeah, and also think about your vegetable gardens and your crop fields. You're gonna have you're like I'm predicting in 2 weeks or a month we're gonna see a whole lot of blossom end rot because it has been so dry that the plants have not been transpiring as much because there hasn't been water to pull up, and so we're not getting some of those minerals that we would get through normal transpiration. So if you haven't kept up on your watering in your vegetable garden, then you can expect to see some problems associated with drought in a few weeks or months. And so if you haven't been watering your garden, when you go back to water it again, you may want to throw a little extra fertilizer on at that time and maybe even add a little bit of a foliar spray for some of those minerals that haven't been moving through the plant. So make sure that you are deeply irrigating. If you're irrigating and you're not just giving a shallow spray over the top, because that's actually going to make your grasses and plants weaker, and make sure that you are giving them a little extra fertilizer when you are deep watering your plants so that they can make up for what they missed the past couple weeks when you weren't watering. If you're watering regularly, good on you. You'll have much healthier, happier plants as a result of that. But for your pasture fields, the best thing you can do is kind of defer your grazing for a little while until your plants can get caught back up again.
Hey, we just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has sent us an evaluation. That information is so very important. We are still looking for feedback from our listeners. So if there's a show that you've listened to that has really helped you, then please feel free to go ahead and fill out that evaluation again and just let us know how you're using the information for the show.
Yeah, let us know how our show is helping you, whether it's a major thing, whether it's a little gold nugget you're able to get out of it. We try to mix a lot of our experiences with the show and just want to know how it helps you out.
You can fill out these evaluations as many times as you want. And also, you can use those evaluations to tell us if there's a topic that you would like us to address. So we do welcome that. And we're always looking for new ideas on things that you feel are important. So let us know what you want to learn from our show. You can find the evaluation online at https://bit.ly extension calling evaluation. And that is https://bit.ly, so that's bit.ly, extension calling evaluation. And extension calling and evaluation all need to be capitalized, but those are the only caps you need to worry about. Or you can just call us at the office. You can reach me at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673.
And you can also contact me at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.